Welcome back to What's Not Sports. I'm your host, Will O'Connor. This is the 6 out of 8 in the 8 and 80 challenge. We're closing on the end of this project very, very quickly. The end of the year is coming. There's only a couple more weeks, if that. But this journey has been fun, and this interview is a fantastic interview. I'm joined by a former Australian Rugby Sevens coach, Andy Friend. He talks about his coaching career and where he is now. It's a fantastic interview. Unfortunately, due to who knows what, some process in the recording when I was interviewing Andy, I don't know what happened on my recording end, but it ended up just being me. The recording came through and it was just myself interviewing him and had nothing of him. So there's been a huge technical difficulty there, which is such a shame because we had a great chat. There's still a great product here for this episode. We just miss a little bit of the end and miss a little bit of his story, but nonetheless, what we got of the interview is still great. I still want to put it up because it is a fantastic interview, and I just thought I'd make you guys prepared for that. And I want to apologize in advance to you guys and to Andy because taking out the time of that, and I don't know what happened on my end or what happened on the recording end for that to happen, but it did. Got to deal with it and still get this product out before the end of the year. So again, thank you, Andy, very much for taking the time out of your day to do this with me. Sorry for the mishap that I only just discovered after it being recorded. But nonetheless, enjoy the episode, guys. It's a great story, and here you go. Welcome back to What's Not Sport. I am your host, Will O'Connor. We're back here for another inside story and joined by a very special guest, a great coach of rugby union. I'm joined here by Andy Friend.
Great to meet you, Will.
It's great to have you on. You've had, I guess, your whole life has been steeped in rugby union, and you've been a player, a coach, a mentor. What is it that you love about it?
Yeah, rugby's got this incredible hook, hasn't it? As a young boy, I would have been all of about 10 years of age. I was living in Switzerland. We were lucky enough, my father was in the trade business, so we moved over to live in Geneva, Switzerland. Always played AFL or soccer because we were born in Canberra, but then moved to Melbourne. And then I saw this game of rugby, and it just captured my imagination as a young boy. So unfortunately, in Switzerland, you couldn't play it. We then moved to England, and I started playing the game when I was about 12 years of age. And from that second onwards, mate, I've always just had this love affair with the game. I think it's just the concept of having to move a ball up a field, to run through people, to work with people. The difference of all the positions, you can be big, you can be small, you can be tall, you can be thin, you can be all of those different things, and you've all got a place on the field. That's always fascinated me, and I've been really fortunate that, pretty much my whole working life, it's been around the game of rugby union, being a professional rugby coach for just over 30 years. So, the hook got into my mouth when I was about 10, mate. I haven't been able to spit it out yet.
That's just incredible. And I actually read up that when you were 10 for Christmas, you got a Wallabies rugby ball. Is that right?
I did. You've done some good research there, mate. Yeah, that was my first ever Wallaby. It was the old Wallaby Adidas ball, and it was an old leather ball, had black ends on it, and it was a beautiful shaped ball until it got wet, and then it became really fat and really heavy, and it used to hurt to kick. But I pretty much used to sleep with that thing.
Now, you talk about growing up playing rugby over in England after I guess you couldn't really play it in Switzerland. Can you tell me what it was like playing over there before you came back to Australia?
Yeah, well, England, rugby's a winter sport, so winter in England can be pretty dire. So probably, different, certainly different to here. So the grounds were always heavy. I was fortunate. I was a soccer player prior to that, so I could actually kick a ball.
Mm.
So I got the duties of being the goal kicker. So I continued to keep moving and kick goals and run around as best you could in the heavy conditions. But rugby over in England is a really popular sport. I then went to my first Test match when I was there as a young boy, watching the Wallabies and watching England play at Twickenham, and again the love affair with rugby just continued to grow
Mm.
because of the interest that the game holds over there in the UK. So was really fortunate with a couple of teachers that I had who took me under their wing and taught me the game. And when I came back here when I was about 13, 14, it was a very different game because the tracks here are hard. But
Mm.
I'd learnt to play a more tactical game because of the conditions over there as a young fella. So was able to sort of blend that in with the game that we had back here, and it certainly helped me on my way.
Yeah. Do you think you just said playing over in the UK as a young bloke taught you a lot of tactical things and you brought that here? Do you think that helped, I guess, spark your career as a coach?
I don't think it was there that I got the interest in coaching. I remember at around about the age of 16 and being so I would have been in about year 10 or 11, probably year 11, and we got asked what did we want to do when we finished school. And I remember everyone writing stuff on a piece of paper, and I couldn't work out what they would be writing because I had no idea at the age of 16 what I wanted to do. And the teacher came over to me and said, "You haven't got anything written." And I said, "That's because I don't know what I want to do." And he said, "What does your father do?" I said, "Well, he's an accountant." He said, "Well, put down accountant." I said, "I don't want to be an accountant. I know I don't." And he said, "Well, then," and I went to the grammar school. He said, all the typical things. Well, either be a doctor, a lawyer, or a solicitor. And I said, I don't want to be any of those things. I know I don't want to do that. He said, "Well, what do you?" He said, "If they put you in a room full of 100 people who you'd never met, what would you be comfortable talking about?" And I said, "Rugby." And he said, "Well, don't be stupid. That's not a professional sport, and you won't be able to do that." But that triggered something in my mind to think that was the one thing I loved, and it was the one thing I felt I could talk about. I was a fullback as a player, so I had an armchair right at the back of the field to watch the game, so you could see the game unfold. I had a version of what I thought the game looked like. But pretty much from that second onwards, I always held this fascination that what if I could play rugby for the rest of my life? It would be great, which is untenable, but at that age you don't think that. Or if I couldn't play, could I coach? And those two things, playing first into coaching was my dream and my passion. Unfortunately, I had some pretty horrific knees and I kept getting knee injuries. So I did a coaching degree at the University of Canberra, and when I finished in 91, continued to try and play, but I didn't have much of a career in my playing. And then I met my wife, and I was an outward bound instructor. She didn't even realise I was a rugby coach when we fell pregnant with our eldest boy, who's now 31. She said, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Well, actually, I did a coaching degree and I love coaching. I love rugby." She said, "I didn't even know you played it." I said, "Well, I did." And I got a coaching job at the Institute of Sport as the coach on scholarship. That was in 1994, and that's where my career started.
Wow. Could you tell me a bit about, I guess, the injuries you had that pushed you away from playing rugby and how it was transferring into doing that coaching degree?
Yeah, well, I only really ever had one injury, and it was a left knee, and I did my ACL when I was about 15, which back then people didn't really know what ACLs were. So you used to do a cartilage, and then you'd be out for about 6 months. But I did an ACL. I had surgery on that when I left school, and again, being a young bloke and not really knowing what we needed to do, I went overseas. I did a gap year over in the UK and didn't really work on my knee. I was then fortunate enough to get into the Institute of Sport as a player. Rugby had just started in 1988. It had started as a scholarship program. But between 1998, end of 98 to 1991, I played 13 games of rugby because I continued to have these issues with I ruptured my ACL again, so I had more surgery on that. I needed a lateral release on it, cartilage issues. I had 5 operations in the space of 4 years. And then because of, again, the way things were back then, we're a lot better at rehabbing now. I had imbalances all across my body. So I would tear hamstrings, I'd tear quads, I'd tear groins, I'd tear everything. So I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I stopped playing footy at about the age of 23. And then I joined Outward Bound. So my rugby career was cut very short because of those injuries, but it didn't dampen my love for the game and my desire to one day possibly work in it. And so, yeah, that's how I went from being a player. Played pretty much every weekend as a schoolboy. As soon as I had the knee operation, I struggled because of all those other things. So, but in a weird way, Will, it got me into coaching early, and here I am now, having had a fantastic journey with rugby, and really thankful for the time I had there.
Yeah, that's, uh, I guess, fantastic that you didn't lose the love of the sport because of your injury, and you found another way to stay apart, be a part of it. Can you tell me about your early career as a coach?
Yeah, so I started at the Institute of Sport in it would have been October 1994, and the only reason I remember that is because Josh, who's our eldest boy, he was 2 weeks old when we walked into the Institute of Sport, and I was one of 17 coaches. They used to run a coach on scholarship program back then, and I was the one rugby union coach. So they had a coach from each sport: volleyball, netball, water polo, athletics, soccer, so on and so forth. And I was the rugby union coach, and so I had 7 players that I had to work with in my first year. One of those happened to be Stephen Larkham, one of them happened to be Joe Roff, and one happened to be Justin Harrison, and 4 other good young players, but at the time, or they were good young players at the time, but they never went on to the heights of those other boys. So really fortunate to be linked up with those good young players. Worked with ACT under 19s and ACT under 21s at the time. So I did a year there as a coach on scholarship, which I also did my graduate diploma in sports coaching. And then in 1995, around September 95, the game had just gone professional. I got a call from a guy called Matt Williams, who was the manager of the Waratahs, and he said he'd heard about what I was doing, or the things we were doing down in Canberra, and he'd be interested to talk, and they offered me a job as it was called Developing Elite Teams Coordinator. It was a real mouthful. So I started there in 1990, late 95, and I worked there for 4 years as coordinating all the teams underneath the Waratahs, and then became a skills coach leading into 1998, 1999 with the Waratahs, which back then the game, I said, had just gone professional. It was a crazy time because everyone thought, now it's professional, we better be full time, but we didn't know how to fill the day. So I became a skills coach and worked with players, like the Campeses, the Kearns. There's a lot of boys who are older than me as their skills coach, and that's how I got into the pro game.
Yeah, that's a pretty good pathway to start as the sport became professional. Where did you go from after the Waratahs?
So I realised 4 years into the Waratahs job that I needed to move on. It wasn't for me. And we had 2 young boys then, so Josh and Jackson were both born. And I bought the Sydney Morning Herald, and on the second back page, I said to my wife, I'm going to look for a new job in rugby. On the second back page of the Sydney Morning Herald, there was a little ad saying, backs and skills coach wanted in Japan, call this number. So I rang this number, and on the other end of the phone was Eddie Jones. And I'd never met Eddie before, but he just started coaching at the Brumbies, and he had a link to Suntory. And I ended up meeting with Eddie, and he sent me over to Japan on an 8-week trial, 8 weeks for me to trial it out without my wife and 2 boys, and 8 weeks for them to suss me out and see whether we were compatible. So I went over there and spent 8 weeks in a tiny hotel room and working with Suntory. And at the end of the 8 weeks, they offered me a contract for a year. And I did that consecutively for 3 years. So I had 3 years then at Suntory. Then I came back and I was the assistant coach at the Waratahs with Bob Dwyer. But at the same time, Eddie was then the national coach. So I worked with Eddie at the Brumbies in my spare time, if you can call it that, and then was a technical advisor with the Wallabies in 2002, 2003 in the World Cup, while still working with the Waratahs. So I had the next 3 years with the Waratahs and the Wallabies, and then I became a real coach. I got sacked in December 2024, and I remember an old coach of mine, an old mentor of mine, Bob Hitchcock, saying, he picked up the phone, he said, I hear you've been sacked, friendy. And I said, I have. And he said, welcome to coaching, mate. You can call yourself a coach now. I said, thank you.
Wow.
So that was in 2004.
Wow.
So yeah, it can be a fantastic occupation, Will, but it has its pitfalls too, and the ability for them to be able to sack you pretty much on the spot without much other than we just don't feel things are working. It happened in December 2004. My grandfather at the time, he was my last surviving grandparent. He passed away 2 days after that, and I always remember my pop was a wool classer, so he was a man from the land, and he always had a really neat way of phrasing things or doing things to put things in perspective. And Pop passing 2 days afterwards put things in perspective for me, because my world had just shut down. I just lost my job. I didn't really have any reason as to why I'd lost my job, but all of a sudden I got a call from my dad saying, sadly Pop's passed, and all of a sudden my losing the job felt very, very distant. So there was Pop again, being a really smart bloke, and he didn't mean to pass when he did, but his passing put things in perspective for me. So we went in, and if you lose your job in December, you don't get another job until June, July, because all of the Super Rugby positions have already been taken, and Europe doesn't start looking for jobs until sort of April, May. So with a young family and a pretty big mortgage, it was a tricky time. I got back on the tools. I used to be a tree lopper, did a bit of work around tree lopping, and then I was lucky enough to get a call from the UK, and the Harlequins club offered me a position, or offered me an interview. I went across there for an interview and interviewed with them, and was lucky enough to get the head coach position there at Harlequins in London. So we moved over there in July 2005, and had a great 3 years as a family living in London.
Wow. Could you tell me what was going through your head when in that period where you're going, I could be finished as a coach? Did you think your coaching career was over, or did you know that something would come around? Like, what happened?
No, I don't think I ever gave up hope of being a coach. I just thought, I was frustrated, I was angry, I was frustrated as to how and why I'd been sacked, because there were no meetings prior to it to say, we need you to change here. There was nothing. It was just I was called into a meeting. I was pretty much told, you're out. So that was really hard, and it was probably the way it happened that was probably the most frustrating for me. But at the same time, no one gave me anything concrete that you've done this poorly, or we've sacked you because you've done this, you brought the game into disrepute. I could have handled all of that, but I hadn't. So in my mind, I disagreed with it, and I thought, well, I haven't done anything wrong, so there's no reason I won't get another job. So I stayed. I have the capacity to stay pretty positive, so I stayed very positive, and for the first time in my life, I got an agent, and my agent, Charles Mountyfield, he went out and found that job for me, and I flew across and interviewed, and managed to secure the job working with Dean Richards and the Harlequins, the two. Dean back in the day was or still is a very big name in the game of rugby union, and a really good man. He really looked after me, and he was our director of rugby, and the club of the Harlequins is a very famous and well-known club. So I felt very honoured and privileged to be offered the position, and my career sort of took off again from there.
Can you tell me about that time period there in the UK?
Yes, we had 3 fantastic years. When I signed, the club had just been relegated, so they'd been moved out of the Premiership and back into the Championship. So my first year was a bizarre year where they didn't even know whether the club was going to stay. So I'd been offered the job, and then they got relegated, and then I had to wait for the club to say we are going to continue to support it. But we had a year in the Championship, and we should have been the best team, and we were the best team. We won 35 of 36 games, and we got bumped back up into the Premiership. So it was a neat rebuilding year, if you like, for my first season, which was great. It was my first year as a head coach, so that was it was probably really helpful for me. And Dean Richards was my director of rugby. Now, Dino was never on the field, but he sort of gave me the opportunity to run the team on the field, and he would look after all the stuff off the field. So it was a great intro into head coaching. We then had 2 really good years in the Premiership, where everything in the Premiership is around you want to win it, of course you do, but if you can't win it, you want to get into European Cup. And you only get access into the European Cup if you finish in the top half of the season. And in our first year, I don't think we finished in the top half. I think we must have been in... No, we did finish. We finished in the top half, and the second year we finished in the top half. So we didn't win it. We didn't make the finals. Only the top 4 do. But if you finish in the top 6, you get into the championship. So that was really positive for us. And I was then offered to interview for the Brumbies job back here. And that was in 2007. 2007, and I managed to secure that, and I came back and I was the Brumbies coach in 2008, I think it was, Will. So
Yeah.
Came back to Canberra, and it's where I was born, it's where my family are from, it's where I finished my schooling, so it was an absolute gift to be and an honour to be able to come back and coach here. So came back and had 2 and a bit really good years. I signed a 3-year contract, and in 2011 I was sacked for the second time.
Oh.
So welcome to coaching. It was a time when, on reflection, I definitely made some errors in there with certain people that I linked back to the club, the way that I probably didn't manage up. But again, there's a lot of things I was really proud of. But my 3-year contract finished 2 and a bit years into the contract.
Yeah.
So again, you're then left to try and look for another job.
So what happened at the Brumbies, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, well, I had a young coaching team around me, and we were a good coaching team, but it was a young coaching team. And I'd signed a lot of players who had big personalities, and some of them, I was very aware of some of the personalities, but as a young coach, I thought, I reckon I can manage those. Upon reflection, I had too many big personalities to attempt to manage. And I didn't manage up, and it's as someone who now works in this leadership space, one of my big things to leaders is you need to manage what sits above you, and if you don't, it can damage you. And I didn't manage up very well, so they were the big lessons that I took out of that. I had I was comfy with a lot of things I was doing. RUPA, the Rugby Union Players Association, had become very powerful. There were certain things that we were doing at training that, according to the Players Association, we shouldn't be doing. And obviously our players were talking to them. Anyway, it all became a bit messy, and in the end I said, I'm not changing. And that, linked with a couple other things, led to my demise.
Wow. And after you finished up at the Brumbies, what was next for you?
Well, about 9 months prior to that, to my sacking, my wife had had a mountain bike accident and suffered an acquired brain injury. So at that time, and I then stayed on as the coach. So when I got the sack, in a weird way, I was really thankful because I could finally stop and it sounds weird now, but I could stop and now look after her. So should I have stopped? Did I need to be sacked to do it? If I look at it, with my experience now, I just would have stopped the job and looked after her. But I didn't. I was a young coach and felt that I could do both. Anyway, so when I got sacked, I then made a commitment that I'd spend the next 12 months working with my wife to try and rehabilitate her and get her life back on track. So we did, and we ended up we did a big charity event. Again, one of the pluses of being a rugby coach is you have a bit of a profile. So I had a bit of a profile, and I'd been sacked, so my face had been splashed all across the newspaper, so people knew who I was, maybe for the wrong reasons, but they knew who I was. So I used that and my desire to work with my wife to raise some money for brain injury, because prior to Kerry having her accident, I didn't know anyone who had a brain injury, and I didn't realise how debilitating that was and how tricky it was to live with it. So we chose to ride a mountain bike from Cooktown to Canberra to try and raise awareness and funds for people with acquired brain injury, and to support Outward Bound, who was where Kerry and I met. We were both instructors at Outward Bound, and to try and run courses, if we got enough money, to run courses for people with acquired brain injury. So long story short, Will, but was it 93 days of riding, and we finally got back to Canberra and we raised 180 grand and was able to split that between our two charities of choice. But most importantly, we got Kerry back on track, and she had this sense of purpose and had been out in the bush where it's a lot quieter for you to try and assist a recovering brain. And she made enormous progress through that period. And it was right at the end of that period that we agreed with our two boys who'd come up to join us for a period of it, that I'd been offered jobs ever since I'd got the sack, but I chose not to take them. But we then decided that Kerry was right to go, and we'd head back to Japan. So in December 2011, I signed a contract with Canon, and in March 2012, after the ride had finished and after we'd settled everything back here, Kerry and I moved back over to Japan and took up a 2-year contract with Canon.
Wow, that's incredible. Just everything of that story. And what? How was the year off looking after your wife?
It was great. We don't normally have that time, and so we made a choice. Financially, it wasn't probably wasn't a wise choice, but not everything's about finances. So, it allowed me to connect back to Kerry and to my family, to my two boys, who at the time were 15 and 13.
Yeah.
Or 15 and 14, 16 and 14 maybe. So, mate, I again, with everything that comes your way in life, you can go one of two ways. You can use it to sink you, or you can use it as a springboard to bounce into something better. And with every major disappointment we've had, the first sacking, which then springboarded us into London, the second sacking, which springboarded us into the ride, and just an incredible 12 months to reconnect and get perspective on what life's about. Did I ever want those things to happen? No. But when they did happen, Kerry's accident, did I want it to happen? No. But we've used all of those negative things as a way of getting into something better. So, it was upon reflection, Will, I can say it's probably one of the best years of my life.
Oh, wow.
Doing the things that you love doing, which is being with your loved one and supporting, and also doing something that's meaningful. So, and weirdly, I love riding mountain bikes, but would I ever ride along the Bicentennial Trail again from Cooktown to Canberra. Not a snowball's chance in hell, mate. It's a horrific ride. So
Oh, wow.
pleased I've done it. I need to finish it down to Hillsville, and I've got to Tom Grog, and I've got about 600k to go, and I'll get that done at some stage. And then I can say I've completed the longest horse trail in the world.
Oh, wow. That's just amazing and such an incredible thing. Now, to jump back into coaching, what was your second stint in Japan like?
The first 2 years were fantastic. It was a new club, Cannon, and really enjoyed that. We were rebuilding a club, and we had tremendous support from the company, and they'd built a $20 million facility, amazing gym, amazing recovery rooms and facilities and meeting rooms and 4G pitch and main pitch. So I loved it, absolutely loved it. But at the end of it, there were a few things went on there that I just didn't want to stay. I didn't want to stay on and continue working in that environment for various reasons. So I got a call back. I got an offer back from Suntory, and they offered me to come back to Suntory. So I did. So my first 2 years back in Japan, we had 4 years in total. I was at Canon, and then I came back and worked at Suntory. And during that time at Suntory, and actually during the time at Canon, we'd realised that as much as Kerry had made huge improvements, she still wasn't right. And living overseas in a foreign country was tricky for her. So
Yeah.
Kez went home. She came back to where the boys were, which was back in Australia. And I then realised I had to come back. So at the end of my fourth year over there, my second year with Suntory, I had an interview about the Australian Sevens job, and I was lucky enough to get that job. So I came back and
Well, guys, I hope you really enjoyed that episode as much as I had fun interviewing it. I'm I am hugely disappointed with the fact that it did get cut short with the recording. I actually have no idea what happened there. We asked a lot of good questions. Andy just had great responses, a great story to tell, and I am actually really disappointed that not all of that did get to come to fruition for you guys. But the story he did get to tell and the story that did get recorded um, was awesome. It was awesome. It was raw. It was really cool. We just didn't really get to hear the more modern stuff, which is just devastating, I guess, on, well, your end as listeners, my end, as like really frustrating from my end, and probably from Andy's end as well, taking out the time of the day and not getting a full um, story out there. But nonetheless, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I did really enjoy it. It's still a good product. It was fun, and I hope you enjoyed the sixth guest of the 8 and 80 challenge. And we'll be back soon with guest number 7.